This is College Matters from the Chronicle.
When the news came out, people were very suspicious, and people inferred all kinds of things out of the scope of my relationship with Epstein. I woke up the next morning with emails saying, "You pedophile, kill yourself."
As an academic and a public intellectual, Dan Ariely is known in part for his widely cited and hotly contested research on the subject of dishonesty. Why do people lie? What drives us toward unethical decisions? How do we rationalize cheating? Questions like these have for years consumed Ariely, a behavioral economist and a professor at Duke University. Those same questions informed Ariely's years-long correspondence with Jeffrey Epstein, the notorious sex offender who, in 2019, died by suicide in a Manhattan jail cell. Ariely's emails with Epstein are part of a now public trove of millions of pages of documents released last winter by the Department of Justice. None of the emails provide evidence that Ariely committed any crime, but they have lumped the professor in with a group of academics who've had to answer difficult questions about their connections to Epstein. Today on the show, I'll talk with Ariely about his relationship to Epstein, and we'll discuss how the fallout from the release of the files has affected Ariely's work, his reputation, and his life. Dan Ariely, welcome to College Matters.
Lovely to be here.
Well, I think a lot of our listeners will know who you are, but you are someone that's very well known in the academic community and even beyond as a behavioral economist who's done a lot of fascinating work about human behavior, specifically dishonesty, why people lie. So maybe it's not a surprise that you were interested in Jeffrey Epstein, but that ended up in the news recently because of this release of emails from the Justice Department. And I reached out to you a few weeks ago, curious if you would come on the show. We had a little back and forth about that. I'm delighted that you decided to come. But I think it would be helpful to set some context here about this relationship. It did go on for a number of years, at least your communications and emails with Epstein. And it looks like there were, I don't know, something to the effect of 4 or 5 meetings in person that I can discern from these emails and things you've said publicly. How would you describe your relationship with Jeffrey Epstein?
So, first of all, I would not call it a relationship, unless you call everything a relationship. You say, me and you have a relationship. We talked on email a few times, and now we're meeting for the first time. But first of all, I want to say I learned a lot from that. And I always talked about my meetings with him because there was nothing to hide, and I was studying dishonesty, and I learned a couple of interesting things from him. And all my friends know about it. It's not something I hid. And when I knew that the emails would come out, I had zero worry because I never witnessed anything wrong. I knew always my intention was good. Of course, it took a different turn. I met him for the first time to raise money for my research lab. I met a Duke alumni who recommended that I go to talk to him because he just gave some money to Harvard and apparently was interested in decision-making. So I went. Before that meeting, I knew nothing about him. And during that meeting, he told me about the crime he committed, whatever it was, 2007, 2008.
Okay.
And we talked a lot about what it was to be in prison. And the way he framed the crime was he told me he was in a bar, he met somebody, he was sure she was overage because she was in a bar, they had sex, then it turns out she wasn't. But he said that was the kind of a crime, and he said he understood why he got a prison sentence, but that's also why he got such a light prison sentence.
So you came into this meeting unaware that he had even pleaded guilty to soliciting prostitution with a minor?
No.
He volunteered this information?
I never check anybody I meet.
Okay.
I meet so many people. Like, I never do background check, have never done background check. I hope I'll never will. By the way, this was with Duke's blessing.
But your interest in him was in research funding. It was not in understanding the dark world of Jeffrey Epstein.
The first meeting, somebody says, hey, there's this guy that gives money to university. He looks like he's interested in your research. Go for it. I called the development office. I said, what do you think? How does it work? They say, go. I go.
And no one at the
I
development office said, we just Googled this guy and it turns out
they
he's.
shouldn't. Yeah, it was so early, right? You have a discussion. It's not like, oh, maybe before somebody signs a check, you do something,
I
but
see.
go and meeting people. So I go and meet him, and he tells me that he committed this crime, and he explains it away. Now, it doesn't mean he's a great guy, but you know, people make mistakes, people go to prison. Presumably, people pay their dues and they can integrate back to society. Now, would I want my sister to date him? No.
Uh huh.
But is he somebody that you would say, oh, I wouldn't have done background check anyway because it's just not me. But even if I was a more suspicious person, I wouldn't have.
What is known at this point is that he has pleaded guilty to solicitation of prostitution involving a minor. I mean, this was knowable if you wanted to know.
That's right. And the way he explained it was, I went to a bar and so on.
Right.
Now, certainly a huge stain on somebody's life, but at this point, I'm doing research on dishonesty.
Right.
So when he pings me later, I'm very curious.
Would it have, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Dan, but would it have
That's your
mattered?
job. Don't worry about it.
Would it have mattered to you if you had known more? Because you are somebody who studies people who exhibit dark traits of human behavior. That might have been more intriguing to you.
That's right. That's right. I think, like, let me turn the question to you.
Okay.
Imagine he's alive, and this is not 2009 when we don't know much about him. Imagine it's today, and we know what a horrific human being he was, but really at the outliers of the outliers of the outliers.
Yeah.
And he calls you up and you say, Jack, let's have breakfast. What do you say?
Well, I think it would depend. I think
No,
if I,
no,
I
that's
think
it. That's it. That's it. You
no, I
get
mean,
the call.
I can actually answer this. If Jeffrey Epstein were alive today and were open to speaking to me as a journalist in an on-the-record interview, I would do that in a New York minute. I think the questions that have been raised about your exchanges was the relationship deeper?
Wait
Yeah.
for a second. Wait
Yeah.
for a second. What if he said it was background only, not yet on the record? You would also go.
I think I'd have to have a conversation with an editor, but I think you're probably right.
I think that my responsibility as a social scientist is to understand all kinds of elements in society. By the way, I talked to about 50 crooks at the time. There was a movie that came out of many of my discussions with them. I talked to lots of people who went to prison. I talked to lots of people who did terrible things. I talked to people who did white hate crime. I talked to all kinds of things, all in a pursuit of knowledge. So my next meetings with him were curiosity, interest. For example, I did do a study inspired by my meetings with him about what crimes people forgive and what crimes people don't forgive.
Right.
And I tried to get him to respond to that. I tried to get it as a way to have a discussion. I didn't get very far. I tried to get him to participate in my movie, in my documentary on dishonesty, to have on the record long discussion. None of those worked out.
And was this because you thought that he was representative of a particularly duplicitous person? Would that have been the reason?
Look, I talked to lots of criminals from lots of things. I would have talked at that time to any criminal. If you think about the distribution of crime from minor to serious, I never thought he was what he was depicted. He also gave the impression, and he said that he had this crime and he rehabilitated. But I was still curious.
But at some point, the fact of his criminal history becomes the reason you want to have continued engagement, right?
So first engagement is money. Everything after that is crime. But, it wasn't that I thought he was the guy he turned out to be in 2018. We learned about it. I thought, like, compared to what he was, let's call it 100%, I thought he was that he committed this sex crime in a bar with a woman he thought was this, that he paid the price, and I was very curious about that. But if you asked me at that time, is there more behind it that they didn't catch? I would have said, I don't think so. By the way, if I knew what I know today, I think I would have worked much harder to understand him, to understand what drove him, what created this. My version of social science is we have to understand what we do wrong so that we can fix it. By the way, the money thing, very clearly it became clear that he wasn't interested in the kind of research that I'm interested in, and we parted way on that. But the thing I was trying to get from him was the forgiveness.
Mm.
Think about this. He committed the crime that is the hardest to forgive to anybody. And he worked very hard to get forgiveness.
When you say you were interested in forgiveness, let me give a little context here. You actually did a study that looked at why people forgive certain things, and you wrote an email to Epstein at one point saying, hey, this is actually bad news for you. The things that people are most unlikely to forgive are sex crimes. Actually, they're more likely to forgive murder than sex crimes. So
Yeah.
you're almost approaching him in an apologetic way.
No, not apologetic. I was trying to get him to talk to me about those things.
Okay. So you're trying to draw him out to some extent. Yeah. And I think that comes through in these contexts. I think that's where my curiosity lies to some extent, Dan, which is how much of this was Dan, I don't know if I should say buttering up, but trying to create inroads with Epstein, and how much of it was Dan has an actual investment in Epstein getting forgiveness. And there's a point at which you're shaking your head, but let me just finish this. There's a point at which you ask Epstein, will he meet with the former head of Ashley Madison? This was the website where people went to have affairs, and he ended up in a scandal because a lot of this information was leaked or exposed or hacked. Mm-hmm. And so you're asking Epstein, like, can you talk to this person about life after scandal? And you're asking Epstein, look at this data about forgiveness. And it makes me wonder, is this just scientific inquiry on your part? Or are you hopeful that someone like Epstein can get forgiveness? Are you hopeful that someone like the head of Ashley Madison can be forgiven?
So I haven't thought about this question until now, but it wasn't front and center for me. But if I try to analyze it, I would say that I think I first have the hat of a social scientist. I think I have the hat of a very curious guy who wants to understand things, even if I don't know where they will end up. For example, in the last few years, I do internships. I go to different companies, I do internships, and I don't know exactly where this would lead, but I try to learn by doing different things. And I would say that third, but with a far distance, is that I have been hoping that societies can forgive. I don't think I ever had an interest in Epstein being forgiven.
But this is an academic question for you, it sounds like. It's not a moral mission.
You know, I do want us to live in a society when there's a real forgiveness. But if you ask me, did I want Epstein to be forgiven? The answer is never crossed my mind that that's a goal. But do I want forgiveness? Yes.
You said early in this conversation that you did nothing to conceal your interactions with Epstein. You really weren't concerned about the emails coming out. And then you said something to the effect of, but it went another way. What do you mean by that? And on the topic of forgiveness, are you feeling like you now require it? I'm a little confused.
Okay. So what happened is when the news came out, people were very suspicious, and people inferred all kinds of things out of the scope of my relationship with Epstein. I woke up the next morning with emails saying, "You pedophile, kill yourself." You know, things like that. And after that, there's all kinds of repercussions for being mentioned next to Epstein. And look, I'm not blaming anybody. I think the Epstein case is difficult and painful. He did not get to stand trial. The story didn't finish. There's still things coming out. I perfectly understand why people are suspicious, and I perfectly understand why people are angry. And on the distribution of people who are getting the bad end of the stick, I got a little bit of that. But I'm not. I'll tell you a story. When some people called me, so somebody called me and said, "Oh, we invited you to give a talk, but we're canceling." And I say, why are you canceling? And he said, look, we read the files. We don't think you did anything inappropriate, but we're very afraid that a journalist will come
Mm.
and the journalist will say that this hospital decided to do a conference and to invite somebody that invoked traumas for people. And they said, and we know journalists, and there'll be a journalist that will go to talk to somebody, and they will find somebody who would say that this thing gives her trauma, and this will be the end of it. Now, when this happened for the first time, I felt bad for myself. But very quickly, I said, these people who, let's say, this medical conference, they don't owe me anything, and they're correct. They're correct. There's a real risk that inviting somebody will create a negative reaction by somebody. They're not my friends. They don't owe me anything. They're just looking out to their own.
Mm.
Now, the downside of this is that I think that we are developing very much a fear culture. I feel that given that I was in the Epstein files, I feel that I'm lucky that I'm a social scientist.
Okay.
If I was a physicist, if I were a physicist, I would just get the negative consequences. As a social scientist, I get to also learn something new about humanity. So every time somebody calls to wonder or to cancel or something, I have a discussion with them.
Mm.
And I try to understand what is going on. And my sense is that we are getting to be more of a culture that is driven by fear.
And organizations do things that are risk averse all the time. I'm wondering if it might be instructive to look at this not in the realm of an organization that's inviting you to speak, but just the public opinion around this. It strikes me that there are maybe 3 or 4 different flavors of what could be wrong with somebody in the Epstein files, for lack of a better phrase. One is there's a group of people that say having any interaction with a person who has a sex crime in his past is just verboten. It shouldn't have happened. Particularly a smart guy like yourself shouldn't have done that. That's one bucket. That's probably the most extreme bucket. Another would say, well, no, really the line is, did you commit a crime? Did you know of crimes? There's nothing in these emails at all that suggests that to be true. I want to be very clear about that. Another would be, well, did Dan and some other scientists and academics of prominence enable a reputation laundering that this guy underwent? In other words, like if Epstein is hanging out with Bill Gates and Dan Ariely, then he must not be a bad guy. And you have inadvertently or not sort of facilitated Jeffrey Epstein's whitewashing of his, past. And then a final bucket might be, okay, maybe he didn't mean to do that, but did he profit in some way from this relationship? And is that problematic or icky? Did he get things from Epstein? Was he willing to take things from a bad actor in society? So I think that's sort of the spectrum of potential complaints about this. And I'm wondering if you think any of them have any credence when it applies to you.
There's another layer on top of that, which is, of course, hindsight bias.
Okay.
So it's now 2026. We know a lot about him. Things we didn't know in 2008, 9, and 10. So it's very easy to come now and say, how didn't you know?
Mm-hmm.
But of course, we didn't know. That's another layer on top of everything. So I certainly did not view him as a friend. I certainly was interested in him to understand a particular kind of crime, plus forgiveness. Did he have good cookies when we met? Absolutely.
Mm.
Did I go and meet him after the first meeting hoping to raise money from him? Absolutely not. I closed that door. In fact, if I wanted to change my research and decision making, he would have funded it. But I didn't want to change my research, and we disagree on that.
Was that because you were disinclined to look at race specifically? There's a strange email where he says that you're part of a politically correct group that doesn't want to look at race as an issue within, I guess, study of human behavior. Was that where the disagreement was?
No, it was such a long time ago. I'm sure we had multiple disagreements. But
Yeah.
mostly our disagreements were that he very much believed in evolutionary psychology. He thought that we are the outcomes of our instincts, and that everything we do elsewhere is just hiding our instincts. And I thought that we are really good inside. I thought that we're not instinct that we try to cover. I thought that's not the right description of humanity. I thought the right description of humanity is that we have huge positive potential and we haven't tapped it enough. He thought I was too kind and generous and soft, but we agree. Our main disagreement was that he wanted to study our evolutionary psychology origin for who we are. And I wanted to see where we could go, not where we came from.
Did you recognize at the time, or do you recognize now, that social Darwinism, for lack of a better phrase, might have been to Epstein's benefit? If he says we're
course.
all just base creatures who just, act out of our lizard brain instincts, then that's a good narrative for Epstein, who preyed upon people.
That's right. In retrospect, so he was very clear about his belief about the alpha male. He was very clear about his belief about the hierarchy and so on. He said he appreciated my intelligence, but he also made it clear, he didn't use the word wimp, I don't remember what he used, but he thought that men need to be men in his definition, and I was intelligent, which meant I had the capacity to be higher in the pyramid, but I was a wimp. I was too kind and generous and caring. But when he committed suicide, my thought was that it was very good fit for his belief with the alpha male. You're either an alpha male or you're nothing.
Huh.
And if you can't be an alpha male, what's the point?
I think I'm curious whether you feel like maybe you missed something. That I understand the hindsight question. And, we should say it's late 2018 when the Miami Herald does its big investigation that really changes everyone's perception of this guy. And most of your interactions, all but one that I know of, were before that. But I guess I'm just thinking, here's Dan, who's literally like an expert on human behavior. And he's spent a fair amount of time with someone who seems like a sociopath. Do you feel like you got duped?
I wouldn't say duped. I do, in retrospect, I feel I would have loved to spend more time with him. I'm sorry I didn't had a glimpse, because then I might have tried harder. I think I had an opening. But I just wasn't sufficiently interested to take it at the time. Of course, what I know now, I really wish I could have understood him in a much deeper way.
So there's no part of you that says, knowing what I know now, I wish I'd never had anything to do with this person. That's what we hear from most people who have shown up in these files.
So look, I paid a social price for this. Two of my friends who came to have coffee with me told me that their friends couldn't believe that they're going to have coffee with me. So if I could, at this level, if I could have just cleaned this episode from my life, I would have, of course. I learned a little bit, and I paid a price. And I'm learning about fear culture and all kinds of things, but not worth it. I could learn in another way. But I run my life by trusting people and by trying lots of things, and it has worked very well for me. When I was a PhD student, there was a general feel that we should step out of the ivory tower and start meeting real people. And when I joined MIT as a professor, I deeply got committed to that approach. The lab is limited. It's great, but limited. I need to get out of there. I don't always know where it would lead, but I need to get out of the lab and try new things. And with him, he was, I don't know if you would say he's the most villain in history, but certainly high up there.
It doesn't sound like you really learned anything from him, though.
So I learned very little. The most interesting thing he told me, in our second meeting, I see that lots of people come to him for advice. And I asked him at the end of the meeting, I said, you're a convicted sex felon. How can it be that all of these people come to you for advice? What's happening? And what he told me is that since he was convicted, more people feel that they can confess things to him because he can't judge them morally. Now, I think that's fascinating. I repeated that a lot to friends. I never actually got to do research on this. I tried once. But I think this is really a fascinating question.
Because nothing I could do would be worse than what you've done.
That's right. So you can't judge me.
So it's almost a confessional.
Yeah.
Stick around. We'll be back in a minute. Hey everyone, we appreciate you listening to College Matters, and now we'd like your feedback on how to make the show even better. We hope you'll take a few minutes to complete our new audience survey. Go to chronicle.com/podcast survey. That's chronicle.com/podcast survey. Sharing your thoughts with us is a great way to support College Matters. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. When it comes to the college classroom, many teachers need all the help they can get. From AI to evaluations to administrative oversight, teachers are dealing with a lot. So let the Chronicle's Beth McMurtry and her teaching newsletter give you a hand. Each week, Beth taps the teaching community to offer insights so that teachers can do their jobs better. Sign up for free at chronicle.com/get-newsletters. Dan, let's just get this right on the table. There's one email you sent to Epstein that's gotten a lot of attention. You asked him for the phone number and email address of a woman that was in his presence, and you described her as, quote, the redhead.
No, lots of people are using it. What did I really say?
Do you want me to read the email?
No,
I'm
it
happy
just
to
said
do it.
very, very smart redhead. Like, let's remember that the emphasis was on the fact that she was very smart.
Yeah.
It's kind of a shame that people are sticking to redhead and not a very, very smart person. Yes, but there was an email like that.
So I'm going to read what you wrote. This was September 20th, 2012. You said, "Would you send me the name and email of the redhead that was here with you? She seemed very, very smart, and I would love to be able to meet her again at some point."
If you asked me in December, if you asked me if I remember that email, I would have said no.
This is in 2012.
Yes.
So again, it's before the major revelations that most people know, but at this point, you definitely know about his guilty plea. And I just wonder whether you have... I'm sorry, Dan, I just think it's really important we drill into this since it's gotten attention.
Go for it.
Do you look at that exchange now and wonder, could this person have been one of Jeffrey Epstein's victims? I mean, how are you sort of feeling about all that?
Look, you're an intelligent person. What do you think this is? Forget the way to create sensations. What do you think this is? Do you think it's an underage person? What goes through your mind when you know me a little bit and you read this email? What thoughts go into your mind that this is likely to be?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
What are you imagining is the person that we're talking about?
I guess I'm thinking about the context that I don't know what the age of this person was. It sounds like you're describing her as similar in age to you, but I do know that Jeffrey Epstein engaged in, or is accused of having engaged in, sex trafficking of women who were below 18 and above, is my understanding. So I'm just asking, do you have any misgivings about that?
You're kind of implying that there was something inappropriate happening. Now,
okay.
Look.
Well, let's take that off the table. I'm not.
You saw lots of email between me and him. You can say, let me take Epstein and make an inference. Or you can say, let me take Dan and make an inference.
Okay.
If you looked at all my correspondence with him, what do you think it is? Do you think
it sounds like you wanted to potentially take this woman out and you asked for her email address and phone number.
Okay. Now
is that not true?
So let me answer this in a second. No, it's not true. But let me answer this in a second. If I looked at your emails with a suspicious eye, if you open me all of your emails and I looked at each of them as if you're corresponding with, would I find emails that look like they could be interpreted as you doing something inappropriate?
I suspect so. Sure.
Yes. Okay. Now, let me say what happened. It's a really strange story because I had no memory of that email because I never met her afterwards, so I didn't even know who she was. And if you ask me who she was in 2012, at that time I would travel about half the time. I would meet lots of people. Really zero memory. But I'll tell you what happened. About a month after this thing starts, somebody writes me. And she says, I think I'm the redhead. And the moment she writes me, I feel such a wave of comfort because most people are treating me like you just have treated me.
Wait, so this is after the files came out?
Yeah, yes. So most people are aggressive and accusatory like you, more, more specific, less specific. And she writes me and she said, I think it's me. And I feel like all these people are attacking me for me doing nothing. Really. I have no memory of who she was. I have no memory of why I wanted to continue talking to her. I talked to lots of people. Obviously, I didn't remember her name. A redhead is a really good sign. The same way that people talk to me about the guy with the burns, I don't think it's not a good way to point to people.
What would have been, Dan, what would have been a better way to have asked you about this? Because it sounds like you don't like the way I asked you about it.
I can think about a lot of ways, but you asked about the relationship with that person. You kind of assumed there was a relationship. But let me tell you what happened, and then we can go back to this. So the moment she writes me, I feel really kind of kindness. Here is somebody, doesn't have to say anything. Most people who say something are saying not so nice people, nice things. She reaches out. Anyway, we talked the next day, and she says the following thing. She says she came to a conference. She met Epstein at the entrance. He asked her what she was interested in. She told him. He said, you have to meet Ariely, and took her to meet me. And then she said, we talked for 10 to 15 minutes. It was a really interesting talk. And then we parted ways. Now, you ask me, do I remember her? No. She showed me pictures of how she looked then. Still doesn't ring a bell. But anyway, if you want to know the story, that's all I can tell you from my memory.
Yeah. To clarify, I wasn't accusing you of wrongdoing, Dan. I think that any objective person looking at this would say, Jeffrey Epstein is accused of sex trafficking. He's accused of having women in his home, on his private island, who are being held there through various forms of manipulation. Yeah. There were people who, there's plenty of testimony about this, who were in danger, who felt like they were in danger, who were being raped by Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah. My question to you is, when you look through this weird history that you had with this guy, is there any part of you that says, oh my God, could this person I've been interested in have been in some danger? That was the nature of my question.
So, A, there was no romantic interest. B, there was nothing underage. And I think your main fallacy is that this is about me. It's an email that I came up with. And I don't write these emails, and I don't do these things. So the accusation was as if you put me in his camp, but
no, I did not intend to do that. If that's okay. The way you interpret it,
I'm also not blaming you. I'm using you as a representative of the public. Okay, yeah. So the people who take this email and write things. So I'm hearing you, and I'm hearing a lot of things.
I think you've spent some time looking back at the emails too, and when I look at them as a journalist, knowing what I know now, some of it feels a little bit like walking through a haunted house, that you're wondering, like, what was really happening with this person and the people around him when I had interactions with him. I would think that would be a natural thing for anyone to wonder.
I think wondering is fine. I think keeping an open mind is also fine. I think jumping to conclusion is understandable, but less fine. I'm looking at the reports. Since the Epstein files came out, there's more and more stories and report and so on. Very painful to look at who he really was. I try not to spend all my time on that, but there was a period when this is the guy I knew a little bit, and it is incredible to know what an outside and inside he had. It's kind of inconceivable, I have to say. Like when I think about my memory and the things that I saw and the brutality that shows from the reporting, it's very hard to reconcile those two. There was nothing in what I saw that would have pointed to anything inappropriate.
Right.
The story that he told me, there was a bar and so on, and I've recovered. I'm a recovering criminal, or I rehabilitated. Felt correct. There was nothing that, in retrospect, I could say, "Oh, I remember X." Now, did he have a strange sense of art? Yes. Were there lots of interesting people there? Absolutely. But if you ask, was there any evidence of wrongdoing? Nothing that I saw could give me any hint that there was anything inappropriate.
And it looks like you spent time in his home in New York. Was that the only personal space of his that you were in?
The first time I met him at his office in Florida. This was when he was still in prison.
You saw him in Florida, you saw him in New York. You didn't visit his island.
No, of course not.
Would you have? I mean, you're laughing.
My guess is that if he offered me to go to the island, now, if I knew there was anything illegal, you're not talking about that, right? You're saying, what if he...
Knowing what you knew at the time, yeah.
Knowing what I knew at the time, I'm a curious guy, I'm interested, I probably would have gone, knowing what I knew at the time. I'm hoping that I have the moral character that if I saw anything inappropriate, I would have, alerted the authorities. But it's very hard to tell. There are lots of questions about how many people were involved in the dark circles. My sense is that it's much less than people think. I think he really kept... Look, what do I know? But I know that the few times that I saw him, there was nothing inappropriate.
What was one of the times you saw him? I promise you this is not meant to be a conspiratorial question. But my reading of the emails is that one of the times that you saw him, this would have been 2012, that you went to his house, and it looks like Bill Gates was there, and that Epstein thought it was kind of funny that you had talked to Gates about the irrationality of dating. Do you remember this?
I met all kinds of people at his house, but I'm happy to talk about myself. But
So do you not remember if you saw Bill Gates at Epstein's house? Or
I remember some of the people I met that they were there, but I don't want to comment on who else was there.
I mean, Gates has been open that he had interactions with Epstein. I don't think that's a secret.
And it's his right, of course, to say
Yeah.
what he wants.
There's a cultivation of a relationship happening here. You said at the outset you wouldn't call it a relationship. You said to the Duke student newspaper it wasn't, or maybe it was the New York Times, it wasn't a friendship. It's something. I don't know what the appropriate word is here, but
no, friendship for sure not. Like friendship, by the way, friendship is somebody that if they call you and say I'm in trouble, you will take a flight and fly 3,000 miles. That's friendship. I have a few friends. That's friendship. It's a real thing. It's people like this was not friendship. And if you think that this is friendship, then you don't have friends.
Fair enough. I guess what I'm getting at is that you didn't need him in order to be around rich people. I mean, you give famous TED Talks, you're a renowned author, that's not why you would need Jeffrey Epstein. I think I'm trying to figure out what you were getting out of that relationship or whatever it was.
He was very open the first time about prison. He was very open about the difficult things about prison. And I was studying dishonesty. Like, the way you study things is you spread wide, you try lots of things. Like, in retrospect, imagine what would have happened if he agreed to come on my movie. Even if he would have talked about one case. Now, I'm sure he wouldn't have said everything, but even a glimpse would have been amazing.
I think that part of what I'm trying to do is walk through the steps here of the years of communications. And there's a point at which I just kind of get the sense that you're getting more comfortable with one another. And one of those points is when you approach Epstein and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about I want some kind of adventure in my life. I want to go do something." And you mentioned the Ferrari factory in Italy as something that was kind of a bucket list item for you.
Yeah.
And he
What
jumps in
year?
and
What year was that email? You remember?
Ferrari was 2017.
So 2017, I decided to go hiking with a friend and to take a month off. And after doing it for the first time, which was April, I decided I'm going to try and do it every year and I'm going to learn new things and so on. And I wrote lots of people. Like,
Okay.
So I wrote lots of people. I took everybody that I knew that I thought had an interesting ideas and I wrote everybody.
I see.
So if you want to see my email, you would see that this was, one of 100 people that I wrote that I said, I'm looking for things. If you asked me a week before the Epstein file came out, yes, did you remember writing this email? I would have said no, because it was something I did en masse to lots of people one day to get ideas.
But presumably he was the only one who arranged for you to have a private tour of a Ferrari factory.
So actually, that ended up not being the case.
It turned out it wasn't great because you couldn't drive, but it sounds like you went.
No. What happened was that I have another friend who was doing research on neuroscience at Ferrari at the time, and he got this a much nicer, a much more interesting trip. I didn't drive, but it was a fantastic, interesting thing to see real professionals.
Well, Epstein thinks that he set up a tour of the Ferrari
That's
factory
right.
for you.
That's right.
Do you, in hindsight, look at that and say, this is me accepting a favor from him? Maybe that crossed some sort of boundary?
I don't know how to think about this. I really do. It's a good question. Like, in retrospect, if I could pinpoint the two emails and take them out, I would have obviously have done that. Never, if I knew in advance, be careful, this is an email that you're going to do. I like living my life in what I think is authentic.
Maybe I'm wondering, was it real? Did you really like this person?
Very hard to go back. I would say that I was interested. I can't remember any feeling of liking.
Did you have a reaction one way or the other when you found out he died?
So first of all, when there were the revelations about what he did, not the full extent, but some of it, it was years after we haven't met. I really felt kind of sorry for the state of the world. I felt sorry for the victims. I was really sorry. There was an emotional turmoil about the sadness of everything, but I was certainly curious about him. Like, let's say he would call me and say, come and just watch a movie together.
Right.
I wouldn't have done it. There was no, for me, I have lots of good friends. I like spending time with my friends. He was not part of that, but he was certainly somebody I was very curious about.
So let's talk about what appears to be your last email exchange with Epstein. This is in March of 2019. It's after the Miami Herald investigation, and Epstein's lawyers have written a letter to the editor of the New York Times, essentially defending this much criticized plea deal that Epstein had made all those years ago, right around the time you met him. And Epstein sends you a link to this letter without comment, and you respond, "Sorry about this. How are you in general? I am mostly very good with some fun new adventures." What did you mean by sorry about this?
So, first of all, this was a long time ago. I don't exactly remember, but look, crime breaks my heart. Predatory sexual crime, much more than that. At that day, I probably didn't believe his story anymore, but I don't think I fully understood the magnitude of what was going on, and certainly didn't accept it yet. And I think it was just kind of sadness in general. Like, my guess is I didn't write, "I'm sorry for your victims." As the world, we've gotten to a place where such terrible things can happen, and I was just heartbroken by the magnitude of the crime.
We've talked about this a little bit, but before we go, where do you go from here, Dan? You mentioned that this whole episode has created some complications for you. Maybe it's just has to do with invitations, but there are some people that don't want to be seen with you drinking coffee at this point. So how has this affected you in your career? And do you see yourself as tarnished by this in some way that you're particularly worried about? Or is this one of those things?
So the answer is, I'm certainly tarnished by at a certain level. In the small sense, they're saying I didn't do anything wrong and I'm being tarnished. People on Wikipedia, for example. But I also understand that this is just part of the world we live in. When I was very young, I had an accident. I got burned in most of my body. I think of this as another accident. I wasn't at fault. By the way, lots of people were at fault. Epstein was at fault. I specifically do not deserve anything bad to happen to me, but the world doesn't distinguish at that level. The world punishes in a certain way. I feel I'm very lucky that I'm a social scientist. So I'm looking at this with interest and curiosity, and also with sadness for where we are. I don't have any self-pity. It's like, oh, look at me. No, I don't have any of that. I had it for a few days, but it went away. But it bothers me that this is the place the world is. The quickness, the judgmental, and so on. So I'm curious. I have slightly more time. And where do I go from there? Usually when bad things happen, I dive in and I learn from them. We'll see where this will take me. I'm curious. I don't know yet, but I have a sense that this is going to take me somewhere interesting as a social scientist.
Yeah. Well, you ask some of the most interesting questions in the world, Dan, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me about this.
My pleasure.
College Matters from the Chronicle is a production of the Chronicle of Higher Education, the nation's leading independent newsroom covering colleges. If you like the show, please leave us a review or invite a friend to listen. And remember to follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast so that you never miss an episode. You can find an archive of every episode, all of our show notes, and much more at chronicle.com/College Matters. If you'd like, drop us a note at collegematters@chronicle.com. We are produced by Rococo Punch. Our Chronicle producer is Fernanda Zamudio Suarez. Our podcast artwork is by Cottrell Thomas. Special thanks to our colleagues Brock Reed, Joshua Hatch, Jillian Atelsik, Sarah Brown, Ron Coddington, Scott Seymour, Carmen Mendoza, and all of the people at the Chronicle who make this show possible. I'm Jack Stripling. Thanks for listening.